I'm sorry. I, you know, I was just going to make this a regular old book review, and that's what it's going to be in a second, but just bear with me for a second. I was trying to figure out what the hell happened with the first half of the week, and I realized I spent like the first half of the week fighting through the DLC in Dark Souls 3. I'm like, where have I been? So anyway, I've beaten everything but Meteor and the final boss of the DLC. But anyway, this is actually going to be a review of Galactic Patrol. Um, you know, it's even weirder, right? We talked about Triplanetary, and Triplanetary was a 1934 serialized pulp novel. Then we talked about First Lensman, which was written much later in like 1949 or 1950, in order to connect an edited version of Triplanetary to add Lensman content to it, and this book, which is the first true book of the Lensman series. This book is called Galactic Patrol, and it also was a serialized pulp. It was serialized in Astounding magazine from, I guess, it must have been November, October, September, probably September of 1937 through February of 1938. And I did find a couple of issues of Astounding online that I was able to confirm this with. So this is a weird book because it also kind of doesn't link in with the Lensman series in an important way, in the sense that in Triplanetary we had the bad guys, the Edorians, or it might be Edorans, but I think it's Edorians, and they're the main bad guys. And in First Lensman, we have mention of the Edorians and the evil that they're perpetrating on the galaxy kind of thing, and their big plan to take over the galaxy. In this book, we have the Edorians, but not in name, because what ends up happening is that the mastermind enemy of this story is a guy named Helmuth, who speaks for Boscone. And my assumption is that Boscone is going to turn out to be an Edorian mastermind, whatever. It's even more slapdash than Triplanetary and First Lensman. Like, you remember how I tried to like say, oh well, if we pretend that First Lensman is trying to do something, that could possibly happen in the real physical world, let's pretend that we can kind of de-relativize something and just equalize things with this classical viscosity formula, right? And like this one. And like that kind of sort of worked in a way, right? It was like, well, if we pretend that relativity doesn't exist, if we pretend that you can just put something into a state where all that matters is the equalization of forces, and we look at the density of the interstellar medium, and we look at what a modern rocket can do, and blah 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 blah, we get something that, hey, it could go faster than light, right? In this one, like, we're even more in kind of the flumpy, let's just make it work kind of situation, like. Not only do we have more lore added on top of the inertialist movement drive, right? We have the inertialist movement drive miniaturized to the point that it fits onto suits. We have the concept of saved momentum, which is a little strange in the sense that, like, if you go inertialist, if you go free in this story, and then you go back to having inertia, the momentum that you had while you had inertia gets like saved your game kind of thing. It's stored somewhere, and it pops back in when you come back to inertial movement, which creates a problem at some point in the book where, oh, this guy, he escaped while he was in his suit and he was free, and so like we need to watch out and make sure that he doesn't, basically fly across, slam into a wall, and die when we bring him back to having inertia. It's very weird, and we see this kind of weird technology stuff happening elsewhere in the book too. We're getting into this space where there's kind of this like escalation hysteria of like technology. We have, the whole story is the story starts because the Bosconians they have this energy generation advantage over the Galactic Patrol, and they the story starts with a graduation ceremony. Our main character, Kimball Kinnison, is graduating from the Lensman Academy. He's getting his lens. We're now in the time period where the lenses have been accepted as proving someone to be incorruptible, across the galaxy. Basically, the Lensmen are kind of a galaxy-wide, 100% trustworthy force to stop crimes, etc., etc., etc. We've talked about how that's a bit of a cheap but useful plot device. If you can wear a lens, then you're definitely incorruptible. Maybe we'll see that change later. I don't know yet. I'm still working my way through the series. Anyway, he gets basically put into what is just one shade shy of a suicide mission. He gets given a ship, and it's the fastest ship that the Galactic Patrol has. And his job is to go and find one of these enemy ships that has this, I'm pretty sure it's the energy generation hardware that they need to understand how it works. And his job is to get that ship, capture it with this new Q gun that they have, which the description for the Q gun is great. Okay. We talked about how space battles are in this series already, where, it's basically two ships that are just big orbs studded with guns, shoot at each other and hold each other with tractor beams until one of them dies. And they've all got these shields or screens, right, that prevent, attacks from getting through, and they have beams and rays and needle rays and whatever. The Q gun is a very peculiar thing, because what it is, it's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous because you take screens and you make the screens into a tube. You push the screens tube through the enemy screens with other rays to break through the enemy screens. And then you just basically shoot a big bomb through it. and the best part is that they're like, we don't know if it's really going to work, but give it a shot, And that just gets this mission one hair sliver closer to a suicide mission, where it's like, well, the Q gun might work, and it might also blow you up, so good luck. We get this cool mission where the mission is to capture this info about the enemy technology, which, he kind of succeeds at, but it's very difficult. We're getting into the point where the Lensman characters are... Well, let me put it this way. I've read that the Lensman characters kind of become Supermen. And they're certainly powerful in this one, but they do have trouble. They usually come up with clever ways to get out of the trouble, and those ways can seem somewhat contrived or convenient at times. But basically, the Britannia, the ship that he gets, and it's very strange that the ship was called Britannia, and I'm reading these books at the same time and talking about Ultima. Side note, but very strange. They take out the enemy ship. They get the information about the technology. Then they basically put it onto a tape, because basically their cover's blown. And all of these Bosconian ships are coming toward them, and they know they're not going to be able to fight them with the Britannia by itself. So they put the information onto tapes, like cassette tapes, I guess, something like that. Magnetic tapes, I assume? Or maybe they're like paper tapes at this point. If this was written in 1937, it's pre-ENIAC. They just say tapes, so I don't think magnetic tapes existed as a recording device at that point, so I don't know. But anyway, they get this stuff, they put it onto this storage medium, and they hand out copies to all the officers, and they say, everybody scatter. Take your escape pods, whatever you can do, and get as far away from here as possible, and get to Prime Base, which is the Galactic Patrol base on Earth, as soon as possible. Another minor point is that the good guy's base is called Prime Base, and the bad guy's base is called Grand Base. And those names are so similar to each other that I found myself getting confused by them as I was reading the story. But yeah, they get into this cool mission where they have to kind of stealthily get to Earth. Kimball and Van Buskirk is a Valerian. He's like a Valerian, or Valeria is a planet that has high gravity, and so the people that grow up there are super strong, basically. They get into this whole, like, like they basically crash on this planet where there's a guy named Wursel, and he's of the Valantian race. They have crazy mind powers, and they're fighting against the Delgonians. And there's this really cool sequence where, like, number one, they're facing the power of mind rays in this story for the first, like, significant real time. We've had hints of, like, the mind powers of various races, specifically the Eurasians and the Edorians, right? But we've also got the Delgonians who have their own mind ray powers, and they can compel you to do things, basically. And so there's a bunch of cool scenes where, Wursel has been sent to go, recon and, if possible, take out the Delgonians. And he meets up with Kimball or Kinnison and Van Buskirk, and basically they say, well, we'll try to help you. We're not getting off this planet without your help, so we may as well help you finish your mission and then go to ours. And there's cool scenes where they're like, they have a little shelter that can block mind rays, and then they open the door to the shelter and it lets the Delgonian mind rays in, which causes them to, like the Delgonians are basically taking people apart. And they're like, oh, but I really want to be taken apart. And there's, like, some cool stuff going on there. And then they get into this whole thing where they're kind of doing this, like, guerrilla combat, scenario against the Delgonians. They go in, they infiltrate their cities, they take out their power supplies, they do a whole bunch of cool stuff. A lot of really good action in this book. A lot of really neat interactions. Again, the dialogue is still very, well, now it's even more weird because it's a combination of, like, late 30s slang and, like, made up future slang that can get a little bit dazzling at times to read. Dazzling in the sense of, like, I don't know what they're saying kind of thing. But, aside from the timeliness of the dialogue, it's actually pretty fun to read. A pretty good book. And they succeed. They take on the Delgonians. They get back to the Valantian base. They start setting up the Valantians with Lensman technology, with Gal Patrol technology, so that they can defend themselves against the Bosconians should they appear. And then Kinnison and Van Buskirk figure out a way to get back to Earth. When Kinnison arrives on Earth, he gets given the authority of a gray lensman. And this is another neat concept that gets introduced in this book. A gray lensman is, the word they use in the book is unattached. He is no longer the subject of the Galactic Patrol, of any particular planetary authority, whatever. He is basically free to gather resources and push forward his mission, whatever he decides his mission to be, with whatever resources he can possibly requisition. Basically, if he wants something, he just says, that's mine now, and they have to give it to him, and he'll give them, like, a receipt, and maybe Galactic Patrol will pay it later or not, kind of thing. It's kind of similar. Raymond Feist. In Raymond Feist's early books, there's the Serani homeworld, where the wizards, the Greater Path wizards, are outside the law. And this is kind of a similar concept. The Grey Lensman can go wherever and whatever, wherever he deems he is needed. He answers to no one, and he can get whatever resources he believes are necessary to complete the mission, that he decides what it is himself. And of course, the Grey Lensman only works because we know already that the lens proves that a person is incorruptible. And also, it's not just about incorruptibility, because one can be lazy and incorruptible. But, part of the point of the lens is that the person who can have a lens has the drive to keep going, to keep pressing forward in this kind of like quest for justice thing, right? So it conceptually in the book it works, right? If we were trying to make something deeper, or if we discovered, for instance, that the lenses could be corrupted at some point, maybe that'll happen, I don't know. or that they could be, faked, whatever. This could be something that becomes an interesting plot point later. And this is one of the interesting concepts of the book, right? Because we're going to see more of it. The next book is literally titled Gray Lensman, so I assume we're going to get some more of these unattached hijinks. But let's see, what else? We get a lot of cool stuff, like the Bosconians discover the location of Arisia, and they send a bunch of people to go try to poke at Arisia and see, what their defenses are like, what kind of situation, what kind of structures they have, what kind of military or defenses or whatever they might have, and they get their heads handed to them. It's kind of cool, actually. Even Helmuth, speaking for Boscone, goes there, and he gets his head handed to him too. They let him go, and they're like, "We won't kill you, but don't come back." It's kind of cool, actually. Let's see. But one of the things that I found a little bit humorous about the book is that we're ending up in this kind of like very rapid technological war. And they even talk about how, the Galactic Patrol will come up with some new thing, and the pirates will come up with some way to neutralize that, because they both have, similarly powerful research organizations behind them, right? It's a little weird, right? Because you would think that the pirates would be less keen on research, but because the pirates are being puppeted by the Bosconians or the Eddorians, they're actually very interested in improving their technology and keeping that edge. And so what you end up with is, they mentioned a couple times, is that there's like a stalemate situation where we come up with technology and they come up with a counter, and then they come up with the technology, we come up with a counter, and neither side can really outstep the other because they both have similar like brain power behind them. This is something that Kim Kinnison tries to, deal with as his first job as a Gray Lensman, or first-ish. Once he's a Gray Lensman, he first goes to a base to see if he can find some information about the Bosconian plans or whatever. He meets up with these bad guys called the Wheelmen. There's a bunch of cool action scenes, and he ends up getting his head handed to him. He almost dies. He, gets thrown 40 feet onto a pile of jagged rocks, and he can just barely get to his ship before he loses consciousness kind of thing. He ends up in the hospital for a little while. This is where we are introduced to Clarissa McDougal, where, again, this is one of those things that you could not get away with, or that it would be hard to get away with writing today. But basically, the higher-ups in Galactic Patrol are like, see if you can pair him off with this Clarissa McDougal character. And there's kind of this weird, like mild eugenics kind of feel to what they're kind of planning. It's gentler than that, but at the same time, it's not like natural, I guess. It's very much a kind of like we've had hints of like the Arisians having a breeding program for Earthlings. In Triplanetary, they talked about how eventually it was going to come down to these two particular lines intertwining at the right time to produce someone with the right powers to fight back against the Eddorians, kind of thing. And we're seeing elements of that here. It's the scenes where he's in the hospital with Clarissa McDougal are also like the kind of thing that would be hard to get away with writing today, because like the language is all really like soft. Like, he calls her a dumbbell, and she calls him a brat, and there's things like that. And like these days, you would have a bunch of profanity going back and forth, but like the feeling is there, right? In the sense that he's treating her as not particularly qualified, and she's treating him as an idiot because he just wants to get back out there and get beaten up again. And it's kind of a cool interplay. And the cool thing about it, of course, is that it's not just cool interplay, it's a setup. Because later on, she gets captured, she's working on a ship in deep space, and she gets captured by some pirates, and he uses the things that he said to her and the things that she said to him to kind of talk covertly back and forth with her through a person that he's controlling with his lens. And you're like, mind control with the lens, and it's like, actually, yes. This is where the mental aspects of combat are starting to get emphasized a little bit. We have, after he recovers, he basically goes to Arisia and he says, may I approach Arisia? And they're like, well, yes. We were expecting you, but we weren't sure whether it was going to be you or this other guy first. And I just want to bet," which is, I think, a great little side element there. But he basically goes to Arisia and he gets intensive training on the use of the lens and the projection of his own mind powers. When he met Wurzel and the Volantians, he discovered that they kind of naturally had these mind power projection abilities. Not super strong, but way stronger than him. And so he goes to Arisia, and Arisia is like, yes, the Volantians have this kind of power to a small degree, but eventually, we're hoping that the people who carry lenses will have that ability to a great degree. And so we're going to help you learn how to use the lens in the way that it's meant to be used, to project these powerful mental energies, to do, mind control, espionage, hypnotic compulsion kind of things. And these are, of course, going to be, we've seen that these are kind of the ultimate weapons of this universe, right? The fight between the Arisians and the Adorians is one of these mental powers specifically. It's just that the Arisians are not super motivated to get their hands dirty, and the Adorians are kind of kept in the dark for the most part about the location and powers of Arisia, and so they're not clashing directly, but Arisia is trying to build up the powers of the Earthlings and the rest of the galaxy to fight back against the Adorians. It's a little complicated, but that's part of why this is such a classic. It's like the real fundamental space opera concept, right? So he gets beaten by the wheelmen. Again, another point worth noting is that the different alien races that appear in this story are really unique and interesting, and they can be a little bit shy on like high level, like extreme detail. Like there's not like a whole paragraph describing what these people look like, or like a whole long Tolkien style paragraph describing these characters, these alien races. But there's enough there that you kind of get a nice mental image kind of thing. So he's beaten by the wheelman. He goes to the hospital. He gets advanced training, and then he decides to go back. He fights off the wheelman now with his own powers. He basically takes over this one base, and that's the base where McDougal has been captured. He has to kind of no, that's not right. I'm sorry. There's a lot of moving around, but basically, he does get the people. Some of the people that captured McDougal are kind of tired of the pirate life, and so he leverages them into saving McDougal and the other nurses that she was working with and having them get back to Earth. And then his plan is hatched to take out the Grand Base, which another thing that we have going on here is another advance in like space warfare, is that, how do you describe it? They come up with the idea of specializing ships and having some ships be like screen ships and some ships be like specified beam ships, or maulers, I believe they call them. There's a lot of this going on. I just for a quick side issue, this is one of those things where when you have this kind of rapid technological development and these kind of fanciful like technologies to deal with your enemies kind of thing, this kind of thing can get really ridiculous really fast. Especially if you're not really thinking carefully about like what these things can do kind of in the long run. We talked about how in Triplanetary there were these things called spy rays, where you could basically like send a ray out, and these rays were faster than the speed of light. They could look at a thing, and they could bring you back information about what that thing was, basically. And so we've had like spy ray shields show up because, well, you need to be able to protect yourself from spy rays. In this book, we have the mind rays, the mind powers of the Delgonians, and we have the mind power defending materials that the Volantians use to protect themselves from them. We have, in the first book we had tractor beams, and now we are introduced to tractor shears, which can cut tractor beams. But then to counter the shearing of tractor beams, they basically like, we'll use magnets. It's like, really? But that's how they do that. Instead of spy, we know that the enemy has spy rays, so now we've developed detector nullifiers. we know that there are faster than light communications, and so the bad guys set up this galaxy-wide jamming signal, and this kind of like rapid escalation of like technological stakes can get very tiring, and it can also get very like samey over time, just from a writing perspective. Like you come up with a warp drive, and so then you have a thing that can knock out warp drives. And if you don't come up with the right rules for the thing that knocks out warp drives, then people need to come up with a thing to knock out things that wipe out warp drives, right? You have faster than light communications, or you have light speed communications, so then someone comes up with faster than light communications, and so then you need faster than light jamming, and these things spiral upward in a very rapid way, kind of like a technological Dragon Ball Z. It's fun at first, and seeing those kind of turnarounds can be fun occasionally, but unless it's really underlined with like good story elements and makes sense, it gets very fatiguing, and you end up with the scientific equivalent of one character over here, yelling, and another character over here yelling for 6 episodes straight. And so I'm hopeful that this kind of technological escalation will slow down in the later books, because we're now getting into the more like mind powers, abilities of the lens, and stuff like that. But again, we'll see. I'm going to keep reading. Another thing that I wanted to note about this book. So I've been plugging this Lensman Super Pack from Amazon, and plugging is not really the wrong word. It's not really the right word, because they're not paying me or anything like that. It's just a regular link to Amazon if you want Lensman 6 books for $3, right? Whatever. But the thing that I've discovered about these Lensman Super Pack books is that they're actually incomplete. I went and I found on Internet Archive a copy of this book, Galactic Patrol, and it's one of those things where you have to like borrow it thing. But there are footnotes in the original written book, like the original printed on paper book. There's these footnotes, and there's like details about like a galactic compass, where at the center of each intergalactic or galactic starship, there's a big tank that's full of a liquid. And like it's set up as like a map of the galaxy, and there's a dot that shows up where you are in the galaxy, and it moves around. If you're in inertial flight, it moves around with the ship. If you go into free flight, it doesn't follow anymore, and so the navigator has to figure out where you are and reset the dot. But like there's a really cool little description of this galactic compass device in the written version that isn't in the Kindle version that I'm looking at. I checked, it's not there. And so, if you're wanting to take a look at these books, it might be a good thing to go look for either an old paperback copy somewhere, or like a copy that's up on, some archive site or something, because you're going to miss out on a lot of these footnotes that describe in detail some of the neat technology that they're using, fanciful or not. It's a pretty good book, but it has a really subpar ending too. Where basically the ending is Kinnison figures out a way. I don't want to spoil too much of it. Basically, Kinnison figures out a way to get onto Grand Base, to neutralize the vast majority of the people there, and then to basically get to Helmuth himself and take him out. And the story ends I'll just say the story ends very abruptly. I won't say how it ends, but I'll say it ends very abruptly, and it's a little bit unsatisfying. But I guess you're supposed to go right from this into Grey Lensman. But, it's unfortunate that there's not like a cool post-action narrative. It's just, action things happen! The book ends! And you're like, what? No, I must have missed a chapter or something, right? There's got to be a conclusion. And it's like, no, there's no conclusion. It just ends. So, Galactic Patrol. First real Lensman book. At least chronologically, in the sense that, like, Triplanetary was not originally a Lensman book when it was serialized in 34. There was nothing about the Oresians, there was nothing about the Adorians in that book until 48, I think, when Doc Smith wrote a bunch of extra stuff to put into Triplanetary to make it link up with the Lensman book. And then I think he wrote First Lensman in 49 or 1950, and it was published with them, as this kind of series. This is the first real Lensman book, and it also was a serialized book written in 1937 and serialized at the end of that year. And, we have the Bosconians instead of the Adorians, but I suspect they're basically the same thing. It's a book with it has flaws, right? It has this weird technological escalation that can be very tiring. It has with a weird mix of 1930s and pretend 2200 slang in the dialogue. But there's a lot of really cool stuff in here. The adventure on Valantia against the Delgonians is really interesting and well written and kind of fun. The whole guerrilla combat thing where they kind of have to sneak around and do things in secret is really fun to read. The Gray Lensman concept is really cool. I like this idea. It's a little bit contrived because we are told 100% that the lens makes someone incorruptible. We're going to see how that goes in the rest of the series. We have more weird pretend science showing up, right? Which, again, these books have never been hard science fiction. It's sometimes fun to say, okay, we know that these are kind of playing fast and loose with scientific rules, but what can we actually kind of squeeze out of them if we try? That can be fun, right? But at the same time, this one is getting so far away from anything that I could even play with. Like the whole saved momentum thing is like, how would that work? Momentum compared to what? It would be, if you think about it this way, imagine a ship did everything right. They lifted off from Earth, they flew somewhere free, they came back free, and then they got near to Earth, and they went back to inertial. If the Earth has gone a bit around the sun in this period of time, there might be a very different velocity to them compared to when they left, right? The Earth is moving like this, and its velocity here is like this, and its velocity here is like this. And so if that inertia comes back to the ship that came back, the ship was going like this, and the Earth is now going like this, and they might hit. It's weird, and we're getting further and further away from anything that you could possibly hope to wring any real scientific thoughts out of. But it's still fun. The tech is interesting. When it's not too oversimplified, the tech is interesting. The mind power training stuff is kind of cool. I'm hoping that they're gonna push more of that instead of like technology, this anti this, this anti this, this anti this, this anti this, over and over again. I hope we get away from that and get to the more interesting stuff going on. I hope the later books have more of an actual ending. I would say I'm learning a lot more about the series as I go because it's just such a weird series. Like nowadays, a person might write a series out of order. That still happens. People write prequels and stuff, but like there aren't these magazines around so much that are like serializing full novels these days. And so you don't have situations where an author writes something 1 year and then, 3 years later he writes something else. And then 10 years after that, he's written a bunch of books in one series and he's like, oh, why don't I take that book that I wrote, 15 years ago and add some stuff to it and make it part of this series? Especially since, Smith has other series, right? He has the I forget the title of the series, but he has another big space opera series that's very popular that I haven't read any of. But like, nowadays, if someone writes a prequel, they usually are aware that they're writing a prequel, whereas he wrote a prequel without realizing it was going to be a prequel. He wrote something, and then he wrote something else, and then much, much later, he's like, oh, I'll take that early thing, and I'll stick it on here with some stuff. It's not the kind of thing that you get these days. The industry is a lot more unforgiving of that kind of stuff. At least that's my perception. So yeah, fun book. Lots of really good action. Kinnison is not quite a Superman here. He's got a lot of cool powers and a lot of good technology behind him. He is, after all, the cutting edge of the Galactic Patrol. But at the same time, he gets beaten by the Wheelmen, and it's only his ability to learn these mental powers that gives him the edge later on in the story. And I'm hoping we're going to see more of that as the series moves on. So, sorry for my inability to produce videos this week. I'm going to have for you guys the Ultima 6 video tomorrow. I haven't done it yet, but I've done most of the prep work for it. So I'll do that tomorrow. And then next week we're going to tackle Ultima 7, which I'll have less to say about that one, but it's still worth talking about. Maybe I'll combine some of those later ones. Like I might do 7 and 8 at the same time. I don't know. But the other thing I'm doing is I think I'm going to do a tutorial on the twin paradox in relativity, because it's one of those things that I've always kind of looked at and been like, interesting, but never actually sat down and done the math. And so yesterday, that would be Wednesday, I sat down and I was trying to do all the math necessary to, not to do everything about the twin paradox, but to at least cover the weird time dilation paradox that seems to exist. And I found some really cool sources that I think we will have some fun with, and I'm going to work on putting together all of that math into something that hopefully regular people will be able to understand. That's one of my things that I kind of like doing, is I like kind of promoting understanding of mathematics and science to people that maybe don't have a lot of it. I don't know, like people that are interested in it but don't know it. And so like I always had this idea of like, man, it would be nice to like explain to people how important it is to learn a little bit of calculus here and there, that it can actually do things for you. And I'm not going to necessarily say that you're going to get anything, practically useful out of this, but hopefully you'll see that there are some cool things that you can do with, early college math that can kind of explain some things that seem really weird at first, but actually have decent explanations. So that's my plan for next week, is Ultima 7 and possibly Ultima 8, maybe in one video. I don't know. We'll have to see how it goes as I plan that. Maybe I'll do like a short story reading or something, and then probably cover that relativity calculation because I've never gone through it on my own. It's always been something that I wanted to go through, but I was like, I'll do it some other time when I have more time. And I figured this might be something fun to make, like kind of a weird science tutorial. So we'll see how that goes. But that's what I've got for you today. Galactic Patrol, the third book in the Lensman series, but the first book that was actually a Lensman book from the start, chronologically. So we've covered Triplanetary, which was a pulp book that was written in 1934 without the Lensman material, which was added later in about 1950 to Triplanetary. That was the first book. We covered that one. We covered First Lensman, which was entirely, I believe, written in and around 1950 as kind of a paste to stick Triplanetary to Galactic Patrol. After this, we've got Gray Lensman, and then I think there's 2 more books after that that were written after Galactic Patrol. Like Gray Lensman was written after Galactic Patrol, and the next book was written after, and those ones were kind of written in order. So we're finally getting to the in order portion of the Lensman series, which has been a long time coming. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Hope you enjoyed this, and see you tomorrow for Ultima 6. Hoping I can get that video put together tomorrow, and have a good week. The week's almost done, so have a good rest of your week. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you soon.